My name's Alan, and for 30 years, I thought I had it all. A loving wife, Laura. 3 incredible kids, Sarah, 28, Ryan, 24, and Mia, 18, and a life we worked hard to build together. I thought we were unshakable. Turns out I was living in a fantasy. Laura and I met in college. She was a firecracker, the kind of woman who could turn heads with her laugh alone. I was the quieter, steady type, always content to let her shine. Together we built a family, a home, and what I thought was a rock-solid marriage. But if the last year has taught me anything, it's that nothing is as solid as it seems. It all started innocently enough. Laura's sister, Maggie, and her husband, Doug, were regular fixtures in our lives. Their nephew, Ethan, from Doug's side of the family, started coming around when he was in high school. Ethan was this charismatic, good-looking kid, full of energy, always joking, the kind of guy everyone liked. When he hit his early 20s, he started visiting more often. At first, I didn't think much of it. Ethan didn't have much family of his own nearby, and Laura always had a soft spot for helping people. She'd invite him over for dinners, movie nights, even family vacations. "He's like a lost puppy," she'd joke, rolling her eyes whenever I brought up how often he was around. But then things started to get weird. One night, I came home late from work, exhausted after a 12-hour shift, and found Laura and Ethan on the couch. They were laughing, nothing unusual, except she was sitting far too close to him, her hand brushing his arm. When they noticed me, Laura sprang up like she'd been caught stealing. "Oh, Alan, you're home early," she said, her voice too bright. Ethan gave me a sheepish grin, muttered something about needing to get going, and practically bolted out the door. I chalked it up to my imagination. Maybe I was overthinking it. Laura had never given me a reason not to trust her. But after that night, things kept piling up. She started dressing up more, claiming she wanted to feel good about herself. She'd linger in the bathroom, checking her phone, and laugh at texts she never showed me. And then there were the late nights out, first with Maggie, then with work friends. But her excuses always felt flimsy. The real shocker came one afternoon when I stopped by her favorite cafe to surprise her with coffee. She texted me earlier, saying she was meeting Maggie there. But when I walked in, it wasn't Maggie sitting across from her. It was Ethan. They didn't see me at first, and I stood there frozen, watching as Laura leaned in close to him, her hand resting lightly on his. She was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, a way I thought was reserved for me. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. My stomach dropped. Before I could decide whether to confront her, Laura turned and spotted me. Her face went pale, then quickly shifted into a strained smile. "Alan, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice an octave higher than usual. I played it cool. "Thought I'd surprise you with coffee," I said, holding up the cup. "But it looks like you've already got company." Ethan stood, stammering some excuse about having to leave, and bolted like his shoes were on fire. Laura stayed seated, her smile now tight, forced. "Ethan just dropped by," she said quickly. "I didn't want to bother you with it." Something about the way she said it, the way she avoided eye contact, made my skin crawl. That night, when she climbed into bed, she acted as if nothing had happened. But for the first time in 30 years, I felt like I was lying next to a stranger. After the cafe incident, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Laura acted like everything was normal, but I couldn't get the image of her and Ethan out of my head. I tried to convince myself it was innocent. Maybe I was reading too much into it, but the little things kept piling up. One night, about a week later, I came home early from a business trip. I hadn't told Laura I'd be back that evening. I wanted to surprise her. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange. Ethan's car parked just down the street. My heart sank. I couldn't ignore the pit forming in my stomach, but I told myself there had to be a good reason. Maybe he was visiting Maggie next door. Maybe this was all just a big misunderstanding. But as I stepped into the house, I knew those excuses were just lies I told myself to avoid the truth. The living room was dark, the faint sound of music drifting from upstairs. "Laura," I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. No answer. I climbed the stairs slowly, dread building with every step. When I reached our bedroom, the door was cracked open. Inside, I saw Laura sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to me, talking softly into her phone. She was wearing a robe, one I hadn't seen in years, and her tone was flirtatious, almost giddy. I leaned closer, careful not to make a sound, and caught a snippet of her conversation. "You make me feel so young again," she said, laughing softly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I pushed the door open, and Laura spun around, her face going pale. "Alan," she gasped, clutching the phone to her chest. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, my voice low and steady. "It's just Maggie," she said too quickly, fumbling to end the call. I stepped closer, snatching the phone from her hand. My hands shook as I looked at the call log. It wasn't Maggie. It was Ethan. "Care to explain why Maggie suddenly goes by Ethan now?" I asked, holding up the phone. Laura's face twisted into an expression I hadn't seen before. Anger mixed with panic. "Why are you going through my phone?" she snapped. "Don't you trust me?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Trust you? Are you serious, Laura? You're sneaking around with a 25-year-old and lying to my face." She rolled her eyes, her demeanor shifting from panicked to defensive. "You're blowing this way out of proportion, Ellen. Ethan needed advice, that's all. You're making it something it's not." "Advice?" I barked. "Is that what you call this? Late-night calls, secret meetings, and him parked down the street? What kind of advice are you giving, Laura?" For a moment I thought she might admit it. Her face softened, and she opened her mouth as if to speak, but then she caught herself. Instead, she stood, brushing past me. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she said coldly. "If you're going to act like this, maybe we need some space." She left the room, slamming the door behind her, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. The rest of that night was a blur. Laura slept in the guest room, her choice, not mine, and I sat awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed her words, her excuses, her lies. She had brushed me off like I was the one overreacting, like her betrayal wasn't the real issue. By morning, I was running on fumes, but my resolve was clear. I wasn't going to let this slide. She could twist things and deflect all she wanted, but I wasn't letting her gaslight me into thinking I was crazy. When Laura finally emerged, she was dressed and ready to leave. "Where are you going?" I asked, blocking her path. "To Maggie's," she said curtly. "I need some time to think." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. To Maggie's? Or to Ethan's? Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. "You're impossible, Alan. I can't even talk to you when you're like this." "Because you know I'm right," I shot back. "I saw his car outside last night, Laura. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't see what's going on?" "Fine," she snapped, her voice rising. "You want the truth?" "Yes, Ethan and I have been spending time together. He understands me, Alan. He listens. He doesn't treat me like some old housewife who's just here to clean and cook." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. "So that's what this is about? You're bored? You feel unappreciated? And instead of talking to me, you jump into bed with a kid half your age." Laura's expression hardened, her defensiveness turning into full-blown spite. "Don't act like you're perfect, Alan. You haven't exactly been husband of the year. Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have needed to find someone who does." Her words were designed to hurt, and they succeeded. But I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative. "Don't you dare blame me for this," I said, my voice low and trembling with anger. "I've been here for you for 30 years, Laura. I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me." She grabbed her purse, her jaw set in defiance. "I'm not doing this with you right now," she said, pushing past me. "I need space." Before I could stop her, she was out the door. That afternoon, I decided I needed answers, real answers, not the half-truths Laura was feeding me. I went through her phone, which she'd carelessly left behind in her rush. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages with Ethan. reading conversations that made my stomach churn. They weren't just flirty. They were intimate, explicit, and dripping with the kind of affection she hadn't shown me in years. Worse, they were filled with plans. Meetups, trips, even talk of a future together. One message from Ethan stood out. "Maggie's getting suspicious. We need to be more careful." It hit me like a ton of bricks. Maggie knew, or at least suspected, and she hadn't said a word. After I found Ethan's message about Maggie, I felt like my whole world had come crashing down. It wasn't just Laura who had betrayed me. It seemed like her sister, Maggie, might have been involved in all of this. I couldn't sit back and stew in silence any longer. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Maggie's house. When she opened the door, her face fell instantly. "Alan," she said, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is unexpected." "Stop it," I said sharply, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "How long have you known?" Maggie's expression went from nervous to confused. "Known about what?" "Don't play dumb, Maggie," I said, pulling out my phone and holding up Ethan's incriminating message. "You knew something was going on between Laura and Ethan, didn't you?" Her face went pale. She closed the door and glanced over her shoulder, as if worried that someone might be eavesdropping. "Alan, it's not what you think." "So what is it?" I asked, raising my voice. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife is cheating on me with your nephew and you're covering for them." She sighed and sank back on the couch, rubbing her temples. "I didn't know for sure," she admitted quietly, "but I had my suspicions. Laura has been different lately, secretive. And Ethan, well, he's not exactly cunning." My hands balled into fists at my sides. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to believe it," Maggie said, her voice breaking. "And to be honest, Alan, I didn't think it was my place. Laura is my sister. I didn't want to ruin your marriage if I was wrong." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You didn't ruin it. She did." Maggie looked genuinely contrite, but it wasn't enough to calm my anger. "Does Doug know about any of this?" I asked, referring to her husband. "No," she said quickly. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't involve him. He doesn't need to be dragged into Laura's mess." I laughed bitterly. "Oh sure. Let's protect Doug's feelings while my life falls apart." Before she could answer, the front door opened and Ethan walked in. He froze when he saw me, and his confident smile quickly changed to one of pure panic. Hi, Alan," he said, his voice shaking. "Hey, Ethan," I said, my tone full of sarcasm. "It's great to see you here." He looked at Maggie, who was now looking at the floor, and then back at me. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Oh, don't worry," I said, stepping closer. "I'm just here to find out a few things, like how long you've been with my wife." Ethan's face turned beet red. "That's not true," he stammered. "Laura and it just happened." "It just happened?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're a grown man, Ethan. Things don't just happen. You made a choice, a disgusting, selfish choice, to destroy my family." He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. "Stay away from my wife, my family, and my house," I said, my voice low and trembling with barely contained rage. "If I see you near her again, you'll regret it." Ethan nodded quickly, mumbling something about leaving, and practically ran out the door. Maggie sat in silence, her head in her hands, as I turned to leave. "You should have told me, Maggie," I said coldly. "You're just as guilty for staying silent." And with that, I walked out, leaving her to deal with the fallout of her own complicity. When I got home, Laura was already there, lounging on the couch like nothing had happened. She had the audacity to look up at me and say, "Did you calm down yet?" As if I were the problem. I dropped my keys on the counter and stared at her, feeling a mixture of rage and disbelief. "How long are you going to keep lying to me, Laura?" Her expression didn't falter. She rolled her eyes and sighed dramatically. "I don't know what you're talking about." I laughed bitterly. "Cut the act. I just came from Maggie's. And guess who showed up? Your little boyfriend, Ethan." That got her attention. She sat up straighter, her face paling for just a moment before the smug mask slipped back into place. "You're seriously stalking me now? That's pathetic, Alan." "Stalking you?" I snapped. "You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and sneaking around with a guy young enough to be our son. And I'm pathetic." Her face twisted into a defensive sneer. "Oh, get over yourself. It's not like you've been some perfect husband. Do you even remember the last time you actually listened to me or cared about what I wanted? You're blaming me for this?" I asked, incredulous. "You think sleeping with your sister's nephew is justified because I didn't— what? Take you out to dinner enough? Give me a break, Laura." For a moment, I thought she might finally admit the truth. But instead, she crossed her arms and said, "Fine. Yes, Ethan and I have been seeing each other. But it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Do you even hear yourself? You're having an affair with someone half your age, Laura. What else could it possibly be?" She stood up, her tone shifting from defensive to condescending. "You're so dramatic, Alan. You act like I've committed some unforgivable crime. But maybe if you weren't so boring and predictable, I wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere." That was it. That was the moment the last thread of restraint snapped. "Boring?" I shouted. "Predictable? I've spent 30 years building a life with you, raising our kids, and giving you everything I have. And this is how you repay me?" She shrugged, her indifference cutting deeper than any words could. "Maybe you should have tried harder, Alan. People change." I changed. Deal with it. I stared at her, trying to find even a shred of the woman I'd married. But she was gone. Or maybe she'd never been there at all. "You know what, Laura?" I said, my voice cold and steady. "You're right. People change. And I'm done trying to save someone who doesn't even care." Her smug expression faltered for just a moment, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I turned and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay there anymore. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind spinning with everything Laura had said. Her coldness, her indifference. It felt like a knife twisting deeper with every replay in my head. After 30 years of marriage, I had become nothing more than a nuisance to her. Eventually, I pulled into a parking lot near the park where I used to take the kids when they were little. I sat there, staring at the empty playground, wondering how it all went so wrong. My phone buzzed on the seat next to me, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Sarah, my oldest daughter. "Hey Dad, Mom just called. She said you had a fight. Are you okay?" I froze, my heart sinking. Laura was already trying to spin the narrative, probably painting me as the unreasonable husband who couldn't handle her growth or some nonsense like that. I had no intention of dragging my kids into this, but now it seemed inevitable. "I'm okay," I texted back, trying to sound casual. "Don't worry about it." A minute later, she replied, "Mom sounded weird, like defensive. What's going on?" I stared at the screen, debating how much to say. Sarah was old enough to know the truth, but Ryan and Mia? They still idolized their mother, and I didn't want to shatter their image of her just yet. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Maggie. "Alan, we need to talk," she said the moment I picked up. "I think we've said enough," I replied coldly. "No, you don't understand," she insisted. "It's about Ethan." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "What now, Maggie? What else could he possibly have done?" "It's not just him," she said, her voice trembling. "Laura's been telling him things, personal things about you, about the family. And, Alan, I think he's using her. He's asking for money." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. "Money? How much?" "I don't know exactly," Maggie admitted. "But Doug overheard Ethan talking about getting set up for life. I think he's manipulating her, Alan. He knows how to charm people, and Laura, she's not thinking straight." I laughed bitterly. "That's the understatement of the century." "Look," Maggie continued, "I know I should have said something sooner, but I'm saying it now. You need to protect yourself and the kids. Ethan's trouble, and Laura's too blinded to see it." As much as I hated hearing her say it, I knew Maggie was right. Laura wasn't just destroying our marriage. She was putting our entire family at risk. After Maggie's call, I drove home with a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about protecting my family from whatever mess Laura had entangled herself in. If Ethan was using her, and if she was too far gone to see it, then I'd have to do something myself. When I walked through the door, the house was eerily quiet. Laura was in the kitchen, sipping wine like nothing had happened. She barely glanced at me when I entered. "Done sulking?" she asked with a smirk. I ignored her jab and went straight to the point. "How much money have you given Ethan?" Her head snapped up, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Laura. Maggie told me everything. He's been asking you for money, hasn't he?" "How much?" Her face flushed, and she slammed her glass down on the counter. "You've been talking to Maggie? Unbelievable. You're just going around airing our dirty laundry now." "This isn't about me," I said, stepping closer. "This is about you giving money to a kid who's using you." "How much, Laura?" Her defiance wavered for a moment before she crossed her arms and sneered. "It's none of your business." "None of my business?" I shouted. "You're giving away our money. Money we've worked 30 years to build. So some manipulative punk can set himself up for life? Damn right it's my business." Laura's face twisted in anger. "You don't get it, Alan. He's not using me. He needs help. He's been through a lot, and I'm the only one who's there for him." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, I get it just fine. He's playing you, Laura. And you're too blinded by whatever midlife fantasy you're chasing to see it." She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "Save it. I'm done listening to your excuses." I turned and headed for my office, slamming the door behind me. I sat at my desk, heart pounding, and opened my laptop. If Laura wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. Over the next few hours, I combed through our joint accounts. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Bills, groceries, the usual. But then I found it. A series of withdrawals from a savings account we'd set aside for Mia's college fund. Thousands of dollars, all withdrawn in increments over the past few months. I felt a knot in my stomach as I pieced it together. She wasn't just cheating. She was stealing from her own children to bankroll her affair. But the final blow came when I checked our shared email account, one we rarely used anymore. Buried among old bills and spam was a series of messages from Ethan. One subject line read, "We're in this together, babe." I opened it, my hands trembling. The email was full of promises. Talk of a future, of getting away from all the drama. And then the kicker. Ethan had attached a copy of plane tickets, one in his name and one in Laura's, set for a destination halfway across the country. They were planning to run away together. I sat there staring at the email, my heart pounding in my chest. Plane tickets. She wasn't just cheating. She was planning to leave, to abandon our family, to run away with a man nearly young enough to be her son, using our hard-earned savings to fund their little fantasy. I printed the email and the flight details, along with the withdrawal records from the savings account. If Laura thought she could gaslight me into silence, she was about to get a wake-up call. That evening, she came into the living room, still holding onto the cool indifference she'd worn all day. "What's for dinner?" she asked casually, as if we hadn't just had the fight of our lives. I held up the printed emails. "How about a one-way ticket to ruin? You're pretty good at cooking that up." Her face drained of color as she recognized the documents. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Does it matter?" I asked, my voice calm but icy. "You've been stealing from Mia's college fund, lying to me, and planning to run away with Ethan. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" She crossed her arms, her defensiveness returning. "You had no right to go through my emails. And you had no right to destroy our family," I shot back. "What the hell were you thinking, Laura? Were you planning to leave a note? Or just disappear without a word?" She looked away, biting her lip. "I was going to figure it out," she muttered. "Figure it out?" I laughed bitterly. "You've already figured it out. You've figured out how to betray me, lie to our kids, and run off with a con artist. Do you even realize what you've done? For a moment, she said nothing. Then she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. It wasn't supposed to get this far, she whispered. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Oh, so it's an accident now? I asked, pacing the room. Plane tickets don't just magically book themselves, Laura. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice, a series of choices, and you made every single one of them. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. I wasn't happy, Alan. I haven't been happy for years. And Ethan, he made me feel alive again. Alive? I snapped. You call this living? Hurting the people who love you, stealing from your own children, throwing away a lifetime of trust? That's not living, Laura. That's destroying. Her tears didn't move me. I was too angry, too hurt to feel anything but contempt for the woman sitting in front of me. You need to decide, right here and now, I said, my voice steady. Are you going to keep chasing this fantasy with Ethan? Or are you going to own up to what you've done and try to fix it? She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I could see the gears turning in her head, weighing her options. Finally, she said softly, I don't know. I shook my head, disgusted. Then you've already made your choice. After Laura's weak response, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my coat and left the house. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed to get away, to think. The betrayal was overwhelming, but what hurt most was her indifference. 30 years of marriage, and she couldn't even give me a straight answer about whether she wanted to fix it or throw it all away. I ended up at a small bar on the edge of town, the kind of place where nobody asks questions. As I nursed a drink, my phone buzzed. It was Sarah again. Dad, seriously, what's going on? Mom's being weird. I sighed, knowing I couldn't avoid this conversation any longer. It wasn't fair to keep the kids in the dark when their mother was actively dismantling everything we'd built. I texted Sarah back. Can we talk? I'll come to your place. When I arrived at Sarah's apartment, she opened the door looking worried. What's going on, Dad? Is everything okay? No, I said bluntly, stepping inside. It's not. I sat her down and explained everything, well, almost everything. I didn't go into explicit detail about Laura and Ethan's affair, but I told her enough to make it clear that her mother had been lying, stealing, and planning to leave. Sarah's face went through a range of emotions. Shock, anger, disbelief. Ethan? Uncle Doug's nephew Ethan? She asked, her voice rising. I nodded. I know it's a lot to take in, but I didn't want you to find out the hard way. I need you to know the truth. She was quiet for a long time, staring at the floor. What about Mia and Ryan? She asked finally. Do they know? Not yet, I admitted. I didn't want to blindside them, but I can't keep this from them forever. They deserve to know what's going on. Sarah shook her head, her jaw tightening. I can't believe she'd do this. To us. To you. I always thought you two were solid. Yeah, I said bitterly. So did I. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation settling over us. Finally, Sarah said, What are you going to do, Dad? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know one thing. I'm not going to let her keep dragging us down. If she wants to leave, fine. But she's not taking this family down with her. The next day, I decided it was time to put everything on the table. The kids needed to know the truth, and Laura needed to face the consequences of her actions. I called a family meeting, telling Sarah to come over and letting Mia and Ryan know they needed to be home. Laura was in the kitchen when I told her. She gave me a wary look. What's this about, Alan? You'll see, I said curtly. By the time everyone was gathered in the living room, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mia sat on the couch, looking confused, while Ryan leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone, clearly annoyed to have been called away from whatever he was doing. Sarah was the only one who looked like she already knew where this was going. I didn't want to have to do this. I began, my voice heavy. But I think it's time you all know what's been happening in this family. Laura stiffened but stayed quiet. I took a deep breath and continued. Your mother and I are going through a difficult time right now. She's been making some decisions, bad decisions, that have hurt this family. Ryan finally looked up, frowning. What kind of decisions? I glanced at Laura, silently daring her to speak. She didn't. She's been having an affair, I said bluntly. With Ethan. The room exploded. Mia gasped, her eyes wide with shock. Ryan swore under his breath, his face turning red with anger. Wait, what? Mia cried. Mom, is this true? Laura opened her mouth, but no words came out. Answer her, I demanded. Tell them the truth, Laura. Laura looked at the kids, her expression shifting between guilt and defiance. It's not that simple, she finally said. Not that simple? Sarah snapped, her voice shaking with anger. You've been sneaking around with Ethan, stealing from Mia's college fund, and planning to run away. How is that not simple? Mia's jaw dropped. You stole from my college fund? Laura's face crumpled. I was going to pay it back, she said weakly. Ryan stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. You're unbelievable, Mom. How could you do this to us? To Dad? Laura stood up, her voice rising. You don't understand what it's like to feel invisible, to feel stuck in a life where nobody appreciates you. Don't you dare make this about you, I shot back. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed all of us. And for what? A fling with some kid who's using you. Laura turned to the kids, her voice breaking. I made a mistake, okay? I didn't mean for things to go this far. It's too late for that, Sarah said coldly. You've ruined this family, Mom. I hope Ethan was worth it. Mia burst into tears and ran upstairs, slamming her door. Ryan stormed out, muttering something about needing air. Laura turned to me, her face pale. What now, Alan? You wanted to feel alive? Congratulations, Laura, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You've got exactly what you wanted, but don't expect me or the kids to pick up the pieces. With that, I walked out, leaving her standing alone in the wreckage of the life she'd destroyed. Thank you for staying with me. This crazy journey is finally over and I'm ready for what's next. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more interesting stories. And leave a comment with what you would do in this situation. See you in the next videos.